Hello and welcome everybody to our next reading of Taken Abroad. Why don't you get comfortable, get yourself a cup of weak coffee. I know myself, I have iced coffee here to wet the whistle. Let's relax into the sound of the rain, and we're gonna read this gem of a book, an absolute masterpiece written by Lord Armstrong. We're gonna begin this one from chapter 3. So get ready. Chapter 3. Aaron looked down at his watch, and he stood beside his fellow soldiers dressed in the BDUs with his backpack securely fastened around him. 4:30 a.m. Iraq time. This was it, he thought to himself. This is the moment I waited so long and trained so hard for. He could feel his anxiety grow when he fell in behind his fellow soldiers, stepped aboard the plane, and he was about to carry his unit of 51 soldiers into Iraq. His unit leader, Staff Sergeant Buchanan, was the last man to step aboard on the plane before they closed the door and head for the runway. Aaron closed his eyes when he felt the airplane pick up speed. He could feel the bumps from the runway easily through the soles of his combat boots at the bottom of his feet. Then he left his body move at uneven angles as the nose of the plane began to lift off the ground at speed into the air. He said a silent prayer for himself, his family, and his fellow soldiers. He opened his eyes to find his unit leader, Staff Sergeant Buchanan, looking at him. He gave him a smile as the leader gave him a thumbs up for his reassurance. He fidgeted with the excess strap from his backpack belt while a million things ran through his mind. The flight to Iraq seemed to take forever. He wasn't sure he was prepared for what he was going to see when he got off the plane, but he knew there was nothing he could do about it now. Aaron felt his stomach suddenly turn very warm, and when he felt the plane begin to descend, in just moments he'd be landing in the country and it would change his life forever. He felt a jolt of the plane as the tires touched the ground. His limbs went numb and his stomach felt as if the food would come up at any time. He swallowed hard and beat the rising gorge back down to his stomach as the plane began to slow to a crawl. As he placed the release handle on his seatbelt, he repositioned himself to stretch in place, prepared to disembark from the plane. He had a lot, expected to hear a loud noise and see explosions in the distance when he first glimpsed of Iraq, but he was happy to see it quiet in the dark early morning hour, and hadn't planned on it raining like it was, but he would be outside only long enough to go from the plane to the hangar anyway. The unit had all entered the hangar and sat on the floor as directed by Staff Sergeant Buchanan. After removing their backpacks, Aaron felt the concrete floor getting more and more uncomfortable after sitting through 2 hours what the next 3 days' agenda would be. After a 2 hour lecture, the unit gathered up the backpacks and made their way to their bunks. Aaron located his bunk and began unpacking his gear. He had all his gear all spread about the bottom bunk when he felt a tap on his shoulder and turned around and found his friend, Staff Sergeant Paul Pabla, there with a smile on his face and his index finger pointing to the top bunk, indicating to Aaron that the bottom bunk was his. Oh, no way, Aaron said with a smile spreading across his face. Oh, yes, way, Paul replied, grinning back at him. Rank has its privileges, you know, he said as he smiled and pat Aaron on the back. Well, I guess I could be thankful for a good bunkmate anyway, Aaron said. Once he gathered up his things from the bottom bunk and placed them to the top bunk, he realized he wasn't all upset about sharing the bunk with Paul. In fact, he's quite happy about it. He just couldn't believe that of all the guys in the unit he could have got forced to share a bunk with, he's lucky enough to get one of his good friends. Over the next 3 days, Aaron and Paul spent their time getting to know the base and the areas that surround it, distributed ammunition throughout the base, and took the necessary classes they needed to get out in the field. The fourth day, Aaron and Paul and a couple other guys worked with drove a Humvee into the city to get to know the area there. Aaron drove especially so because he's looking around all the new sites, pointing out places that had been bombed and gunfights that had taken place between American soldiers and the insurgents. They noticed that this particular area of the city was almost deserted because of the damage that had been done to the buildings. There are people there, but not many that hung about in the streets. Aaron quickly slammed on the brakes, and the man ran out in front of the Humvee and stood there blocking his path. He couldn't figure out why the man wanted to run in front of a moving vehicle, especially one as large as a Humvee. He sat there, he looked for about what felt like 20 minutes, but in reality, it was nothing but mere seconds. The man had short black hair with a long beard, an athletic build. It was about 5 feet 9 inches tall, wearing torn brown pants and a white long sleeve shirt. Aaron looked over at Paul and suddenly realized that this guy was a suicide bomber. All four men in the Humvee ducked down just in time as the man in the road blew himself into pieces. After the explosion, all four men sat up and looked at each other with a sigh of relief that they're still alive. I can't believe it just happened, Aaron said. We all better call the base, let them know what happened, Paul stated. We have to cordon off the area until the police get the mess cleaned up. They called into the base to inform them that the suicide bomber killed no one else but the bomber himself. When they got the Humvee to rope off the area. When Aaron stepped out, he grew pale at the sight of human flesh that had been stuck to the vehicle and the building walls around. As he took his first step after closing the door to the Humvee, he felt an odd feeling under his left boot that felt like he stepped on a thin carpet. He lifted his foot to find a piece of human scalp stuck to the bottom of his foot. That did it for him. Oh, God! He exclaimed as he pulled the scalp from his boot, turned and lost his breakfast in the middle of the street. Paul ran to his side. Are you all right, Aaron? Yeah, he answered. There's some things that even the army can prepare a person for, I guess. That's one thing that none of us prepared for, Paul answered. Let's get this area roped off before anyone else steps into this mess. Next couple of nights, Aaron found it hard to sleep and hard to concentrate on his work during the day. He and Paul had both stayed up talking about the incident, suicide bomber, on the third night. It seemed to help them both face what happened, and they both were able to sleep better. From the time on whenever they found something that was bothering them, so they couldn't sleep or couldn't concentrate on the work, they would talk to each other so they could get it out of their system, not have kept to keep it bottled up inside. Over the next month, Aaron and Paul attended many training classes on how to react to IEDs, improvised explosive device, how to close off specific areas after bombings and raids, how to raid houses, and how to train Iraqi police. He kept so busy that there wasn't much time for a lot of recreation. In his off time, Aaron would either get on the computer and talk to his mother or call her on the phone. If he and Staff Sergeant Pablo had time to get into a game of basketball or play a couple video games. In the first month, there was a couple of rounds of motor that hit the base that Aaron and Paul had to clean up. He never, he was never bored, but always wished he could be in a little bit more of the action. Do you think we'll ever get to see any more of the action when we get to see you here, Paul? Aaron asked. Yes, I do, Paul replied. And from what I've been hearing, it's not going to be long before we do. Aaron gave Paul a stunned but enthusiastic look after his comment. What have you heard? As he asked, and he leaned closer to make sure he didn't miss a word of what Paul was about to tell him. Well, from what Staff Sergeant Buchanan was telling me, the Marines are pushing a group of insurgents towards the outskirts of Mosul. We'll have to help corner them. We're going to be right in the middle of the action to repair any vehicles that break down and are expected to fight if necessary. So we'll have to go in with our weapons ready to fire. When's all this supposed to happen? Aaron asked with anxiousness. Within the next week, Paul replied with a slight grin, knowing how much Aaron was wanting to be in with the fighting. Have you made up teams yet? Aaron asked, pushing more of the situation. Yes, you and me are a team with Private Baker and Private Gentry, Paul answered. Do Baker and Gentry know about this yet? No, I just found out about it this morning. I'm supposed to wait until this evening to inform you all of it at the same time, so if anyone asks, you don't know anything about it yet. Aaron looked at his friend and smirked. All right. The rest of the day, he did his best to keep his mind on his work, though it wasn't easy. That night, he lay in his bunk thinking in the middle of the action. It took him a couple of hours to get to sleep. Over the next few days, his excitement grew more and more as he waited anxiously for word that the Marines had pushed the insurgents to the point where the army is now needed to help corner them. Paul could see Aaron's anxiety as he approached him. He had been seeing it over the last few days. I know you've been anxious for word about us to get into the action, Aaron. I just wish I could share your enthusiasm. Paul watched Aaron's shoulders fall because Aaron was hoping he was coming with word about the insurgents. Paul hesitated and saw Aaron sigh, then watched a smile appear on Aaron's face when he blurted out, "We have to be packed and ready to leave in an hour. We'll also be changing our position too." Aaron gave Paul a dumbfounded look when he asked, "What do you mean changing our position? Wait, what?" Aaron gave Paul. Oh, I guess that's Paul saying that to Aaron. What the fuck? Okay. "We're not going to work on vehicles. We're going in to fight," Paul explained. "What made them change their position?" Aaron asked. "The surgeons kidnapped a taxi driver and are threatening to kill him, but the demands are not met." Paul shifted gears in his voice and tried to hide his nervousness. "Let's get this stuff ready. I still have to inform Baker and Gentry." Aaron began loading ammunition to the Humvee while Paul fetched Baker and Gentry. When they returned, the four of them had the vehicle loaded and ready to move out in 40 minutes. "Okay, man, who wants to drive?" Paul asked. Aaron stepped forward. "I'll drive." "Okay, let's go then." They all piled into the vehicle, Aaron in the driver's seat and Paul riding shotgun with Gentry and Baker in the back. "We have to go to the police station first to let the Iraqi police know that we're here to help them," Paul explained. Aaron pulled into the parking lot of the police station and parked in the entrance door. He turned the engine off and noticed a shabby look at the building held. All four of the men got out and walked towards the building. Upon entering it, it had to stand still for a moment to let their eyes adjust to the dimly lit room. They found a translator standing next to the clerk's desk. The man held out his hand to greet the soldiers. "Hi, I'm Staff Sergeant Pablo. I need to let the police know that we're here to help them." The translator was an American, Paul could tell. He felt relieved that it would be easy to communicate with the police with the translator present. "My name is Staff Sergeant Randolph. Hold on there and I'll let the police chief know." Paul and Aaron stood watching the sergeant as he left the room and made his way to the narrow hall. Before he could return, they heard gunfire coming from nearby. Paul, Aaron, Baker, and Gentry rushed outside. They reached the Humvee just in time to dodge a bullet that ricocheted out the police station. They couldn't fire back until they found out which direction the shots were coming from. Then another bullet hit the police station closer to the Humvee this time. "Are they trying to hit the Humvee?" Aaron asked himself. His question was answered as the next bullet twanged off the back of the Humvee. "They're shooting from between those two buildings over there," Paul shouted as he pointed to the buildings across the street. "Aaron, go behind that concrete barrier on the right side of the police station and shoot. Baker, you go to the concrete barrier on the left side of the police station and shoot. Me and Gentry stay here and shoot from both sides of the Humvee," Paul ordered. Aaron and Baker both ran to their designated positions and began to fire back at the insurgents. Paul and Gentry began to fire back from both sides of the Humvee. The insurgents must have been overwhelmed by the firepower the four men had because the shooting ceased after only 5 minutes. Once Paul felt all was safe enough, they went back into the police station and were updated that the kidnapped taxi driver had been killed and they needed to find the man's body. After a few minutes, the deliberation, the four men headed back to the Humvee and climbed in. They drove around the block to make sure the insurgents were gone and cordoned off the area and began to search for a taxi driver's body. Aaron and Paul walked to the two buildings and began searching while Baker and Gentry walked the opposite direction and started searching. "Keep your eyes sharp," Paul said to Aaron. You never know if it. Oh shit. Hold on, it's still Paul talking. "Keep your eyes sharp," Paul said to Aaron. "You never know if or where the surgeon could be hiding." Aaron felt his adrenaline picking up as he inched towards the back of the building where the insurgents had been shooting from. He inched his head around the corner to take a cautious look. Paul, noticing that the insurgents had left, was right on the money. Aaron found that he looked at the body laying motionless on the ground behind the building. Aaron and Paul walked up to the man with caution, checking for any bombs that the insurgents may have left behind as a booby trap. To their relief, there was none. They looked down at the lifeless body of the taxi driver, not an old man, Aaron said to Paul. Late 20s, early 30s, maybe. Aaron looked down at the hands tied behind the man's back and his ankles tied crisscross. He moved his eyes back to the man's face that lay one cheek flat against the other, saw a bullet hole between the man's eyes just above his brows. The man had been killed execution style. A tear appeared from Aaron's eyes. His face grew pale. He felt great pain for the man that had been carelessly murdered. Paul put his hand upon Aaron's shoulder. Let's call in that we found the man's body so they can give him a proper burial as soon as possible. After letting the police know they located the body, Aaron, Paul, and Baker and Gentry piled back into the Humvee, headed back to the base. Paul and Aaron held quiet up in front as Baker and Gentry drew a short, chopped-up conversation between the two of them on the ride back. Both Paul and Aaron knew that they should probably spend a couple hours talking to each other about their feelings and what they had seen through that day, but neither could find the words to begin talking, so they both just lay there silently, staring into the dark. It was about 1 o'clock a.m. when Aaron had finally drifted off to sleep. He was having trouble all night as he tossed and turned and finally woke up around 4 o'clock a.m. in a cold sweat from the nightmare he had been having. He lay there deep in thought and motionless as a tear rolled down his cheek. It took another hour before he fell back to sleep. It was 8 o'clock a.m. when he finally woke up. He was late for work, but Paul left a note on his bed explaining to him that he knew he had a hard time sleeping and didn't want to wake him up for work because he knew he needed the rest. You tossed and turned all night last night. Get showered and dressed and come into work when you wake up. The note read. Aaron pushed the thoughts of the previous day's events out of his head the best he could and climbed off his bunk. He gathered up his things and moved to the shower to wash the night of sleep away and thoughtlessly slid into his uniform. He tossed his cap on his head, walked to the door, and walked to the mess hall to get some assistance from a cup of coffee and a biscuit for some energy. The next week and a half for all repetition. Go to work, then bed. While Aaron still had thoughts of the taxi driver, the images of the lifeless body laying there in front of him haunted Aaron every night in his dreams. He had called home and talked to his mom and let her know of the events that had taken place and reassure her that he is all right. Even though he tried to disguise the tone of his voice, that his mom couldn't tell how much he was bothered by the things he had seen. He still got the feeling that she could tell he had changed from the last time she had talked to him. Aaron hung up the phone, feeling better after talking to his mother. Somehow hearing her voice restored a comforting feeling that was lost to sight in the dead taxi driver. These weeks had got 3 weeks had gone by since the shootout with the insurgents at the police station. Paul walked over to Aaron with a look on his face that told Aaron something was up. Where do you have to go? Aaron asked Paul before Paul even got the word out. We have to get to the Iraqi police station, Paul replied. What's going on this time, he asked. Nothing. We're going to be training them. Paul looked at Aaron and looked at the sigh of relief, also a hint of regret on his face. They left and gathered up Baker, Gentry, and Jerry Bowler, a worker from the refueling unit, because he needed an extra man, and left for the Humvee and the Iraqi police station. As they approached the police station, Aaron looked at the building to his left where he found the taxi driver. Will I ever get that image out of my mind? He asked himself. He is able to move. He thought from his head for most of the day when they were training the Iraqi police. After 10 hours of training, Aaron was ready to go back into base and lay his head on his pillow for a long night of rest. On his way back to the base, the guys were laughing, discussing the day's events of training the Iraqi policeman. The ride was quiet and smooth, and Aaron slouched back against the back of his seat while Paul drove along. He closed his eyes and took the conversation and put his remarks in when he needed to. He could feel himself begin to fall asleep, so he quickly sat up and rubbed his eyes back into focus. I looked at the road ahead. Just as his eyes got focused, an explosion threw the Humvee sideways, and Paul slammed onto the brakes as he was now placed at the opposite lane. Is everyone all right? Paul asked as he looked to Aaron on his right, saw that he's finally turned around and checked out Baker, Gentry, and Bowler. Jerry had his hand over his ears and was slightly bent over on his seat. Jerry, are you all right? Paul asked. Jerry, he repeated. Jerry still didn't reply. Aaron turned around and he grabbed Jerry's hands to pull them away from his ears. As he lifted his left hand from Jerry's ear, he saw a small stream of blood roll down Jerry's earlobe from inside his ear. We need to get him to a hospital now, Aaron said to Paul. Actually, shit, that's Paul. Aaron said, we need to go to a hospital now, Aaron said to Paul. Paul took his foot off the brake and stepped heavily on the accelerator. I think we should all get checked out while we're there, he stated. Aaron looked at the confused look on Jerry's face. You could tell that Jerry couldn't hear anything but admired the way he remained calm. At the hospital, everyone checked out all right, except Jerry. The doctor informed Paul, Aaron, and Baker and Gentry that Jerry's eardrums had been blown out from the explosion, that he would have to remain at the hospital. They all went to the bunks and prayed that night for Jerry to recover. Thank God nobody got killed in the explosion. The next few months went by quickly, and Aaron thought less and less about the incident with the taxi driver, though it still remained in his mind, and he's able to deal with it easier than he had first happened. He had a hard time when he had to say goodbye to Jerry, although he still had his life. Thank God he would never be able to hear again because of the explosion that took his eardrums. Aaron spent most of his time with Paul, and when they went working and training the Iraqi police, they grew very close. Aaron's happy he had someone he could confide in when he's having a hard time. He couldn't imagine how much harder his time in Iraq would be if Paul hadn't been there with him. Aaron would call his mother about once every 2 weeks, along with write her letters to let her know that he's all right and to update her on everything that's going on. He let her know that even though he is proud of things they're doing to help the Iraqi people, he had a hard time dealing with some things that he had seen happen and he had been through. Things aren't all what I had pictured in my head when I joined up, Mom, he said. Most of the time, his thoughts would drift back to the suicide bomber and the taxi driver. There have been much more since then, but for some uncertain reason, he would still think back to those two incidents. Maybe it's because they're the first things of this nature he had ever witnessed in his innocent life. His mom let him know that she could tell he had changed just by talking to him on the phone. How could you tell just by talking to me on the phone? He replied. I'm your mother. It's my job to know these things, she replied. As much as he tried to hide his feelings, she still knew. He's always amazed at the insight of his mother had into his life. Paul would always tell her, if it weren't for mothers, this world would be a hard place to live in. Chapter 4. Aaron rolled over and woke up to Paul shaking him. Get up, lazy bones. It's time to get to work. Slowly but surely, Aaron was able to get enough energy to sit up in his bed. What time is it? He asked. 7 a.m. Time to start the day, Paul replied. Aaron threw the blankets off him and crawled down from his bunk. Paul was already dressed in his uniform and was brushing his teeth. You got up kind of early, didn't you? Aaron asked his friend. Yep, we have to be at the Iraqi police station at 8 o'clock this morning, so you need to step on it, Paul replied. Why do you have to be there so early? Because I have to direct traffic today. And it's expected to be a bit heavier this morning because of new troops coming through. That would figure, Aaron said jokingly. Leave it to you to mess up my much needed rest. Paul pat Aaron on the back and replied, You know I wouldn't do it if I didn't care. Aaron smiled as he watched his friend walk away and continue to get dressed. The morning had gone by rather quickly, and Aaron and Paul sat in concrete barrier and ate their lunch. Sometimes 30 minutes for lunch doesn't seem long enough, Aaron said. Yeah, I know what you mean, Paul replied, especially when I have to stand in the middle of the street all day directing traffic. It kind of makes the feet a little tender. Well, at least the feet will wet your head, Aaron cajoled. I can't let you be the only one to tend the brain, Paul retorted. after they finished their After they finished eating, they returned to work. Aaron looked forward at the end of the day when Hilm and Paul could go back to the base and give their feet a well-deserved rest. At 2 o'clock, Aaron came out of the police station, walked to the Humvee, stood and waited for Paul to join him after the afternoon break. Paul saw Aaron and signaled to him that he'd be right with him. Aaron leaned back and turned to open the door to the Humvee when he heard a gunshot. He quickly turned around and looked at his friend. Paul stood there with his head above his heart and to the left. He looked up at Aaron, stumbled 2 steps towards him in the road, and then collapsed. Paul! Aaron shouted. Aaron, Aaron paid no heed to the 2 gunshots that were fired at him as he ran toward his injured friend. When he reached Paul, he bent over and helped his friend to his feet and helped him get to the car that had been abandoned in the middle of the street. After hearing the gunfire, he helped Paul prop his back against the car as he sat him on the ground and lifted his M16 rifle from his shoulder and took aim at the direction the shots had come from. I can't I can't tell exactly where the shots came from, Aaron told Paul as he looked around frantically. I'm gonna shoot just above the building to scare the sniper. If I'm lucky, he'll shoot again. I'll spawn him. Hurry up and shoot them, Paul demanded. Aaron took a look at the building and he suspected the shots were fired from. He waited a couple seconds that felt to Paul like hours. There was no return fire. The sniper had disappeared. Aaron turned his attention to his friend. Uh, Paul stuttered. Yes, Paul, I'm here, he replied. I'm not feeling so well right now. Hang in there, Paul. The ambulance is on the way. You're gonna be fine. Aaron gave all the encouraging words he could, gave it to his friend to make him feel assured. He knew that Paul was hurt bad. The ambulance arrived, moved Paul to the back, began sticking him with IV needles and settling tubes into place on his way to the base hospital. Did everything he could to keep him stabilized until they got him set up properly at the hospital. Aaron sat in the waiting room with his friend folded in prayer, hands full in prayer, and tears falling from his eyes. Unsure of what he would do if his friend who had been there with him through the hardest times were to die. He raised his head after ending his prayer with Amen. All he could do was wait. He paced back and forth in the waiting room. Minutes seemed like hours, and hours seemed like days. As Aaron awaited a word about Paul's condition, 7:45 p.m., the doctor came into the waiting room. He gave Aaron an apologetic look, and Aaron knew that his friend had perished. We did everything we could do. We thought for a while that he might pull through, but there's just too much loss of blood from his main artery, the doctor explained. Aaron turned and walked out of the hospital in silence. He spent that night in Paul's bed and let the rain of tears put him to sleep. He was awakened by Baker letting him know that Staff Sergeant Buchanan had called him over the intercom to come to his office. After forcing himself to get up from the bed, he looked down at Paul's bed and remembered he had fallen asleep there last night because the loss of his friend had blocked his mind from going any further in his memory to prevent breaking down in tears again. The loss had taken its toll on Aaron. He had done all he could do at the time to get to Paul to the hospital at time, but he still couldn't help but beat himself up with the what if questions. What if I would have just kept running once I had him on his feet after I helped him from being shot? What if I would have called the ambulance before running out to help him to safety? What if I wanted to pay more attention at the time to the surroundings? Why wasn't I paying more attention to the surroundings? Why wasn't we wearing our bulletproof gear? Why wasn't we wearing our bulletproof gear? We'd be alive right now if we had our bulletproof gear on. After a moment, he realized the questions he had were endless, and he couldn't understand. He's overwhelmed by the whole thing and was mentally drained right now. He pulled his mind away from the incident the best he could and continued to get dressed. He moved himself to the latrine to shave and brush his teeth. While standing in front of the mirror shaving, his mind got lost in the thought again as he stared blankly at his reflection. He didn't snap out of it until he realized he had cut his cheek from the pressure he had put against the blade. Aaron knocked on Staff Sergeant Buchanan's office door. Enter, Staff Sergeant Buchanan yelled. Opening the door, he moved quietly and steadily to Buchanan's desk and stood aside his way to be addressed by the staff sergeant. Aaron, Buchanan spoke. Please, please, have a seat. As he sat down, he forced himself from breaking down again because of all thoughts racing through his mind. His eyes were an ocean of tears ready to flood his cheeks, but somehow he kept them back. I'm sorry about the loss of Staff Sergeant Pablo, Buchanan spoke in. I know you and him are very close. Like brothers, you might say. The loss is a great blow to the whole unit. I've written his family. I need to ask if he can put together his personal items to be shipped back to his home. Staff Sergeant paused for a moment. Then, I want you to take the next few days off so you can try to heal from the loss of your friend. I know how hard it is for you right now. I've been through the same type of thing myself before. Yes, sir, was Aaron's only response as he lifted himself from the chair and moved towards the door. Aaron, Buchanan spoke again before Aaron could get to the door. Aaron turned around and looked at the staff sergeant. Yes, sir. If you need someone to talk to, Aaron, you're more than welcome to come to me, Buchanan stared. stayed to let Aaron know that he's there for himself.
Thank you, sir.
Aaron walked back to his dorm where he slowly began the painful task of putting together Paul's personal belongings to be shipped back to him, back home to his family. He kept the one picture that he had of him and Paul that was taken in front of the Humvee that they always rode in. When he had all Paul's personal effects brought together that he brought to the staff, Sergeant Buchanan returned to his bunk, where he spent the rest of the day and night in bed, most of the time staring off into space while his mind wandered through the past. Aaron returned to work a few days later. Still not back to himself, he returned to work anyway. As hard as he tried to let things return normal for himself, he felt that it was near impossible without Paul there with him. There's times that Aaron had some close calls of being shot or blown up because his mind would drift back to watching Paul get shot and falling on the ground before him. He began having a hard time focusing. He began having a hard time focusing on the job, but no longer felt anything when he killed or had witnessed someone else be killed, including those from his own unit. Finally, the strain became too much, as he entered the field one day and witnessed three children that were playing with a ball become the surgeon targets that were blown up only 30 feet from where he stood. Aaron stood paralyzed and had to be physically moved by two unit teammates as they grabbed his arms to haul him to safety. Aaron began to resist and run towards the parted children, but his two teammates overpowered him and forced him to safety. Well, that's it for this one. We are officially done with chapters 3 and 4.